Yeah.
This is Geek Therapy Radio.
What are we waiting for?
And now your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger.
Well, I started to record, but then I forgot to actually hit record. So I was a minute into this first segment. Had to start over. Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger. It's going to be a fun show this week. New Samsung Galaxy Fold. After its embarrassing initial reviews from various tech influencers, Samsung had to walk away with its tail between its legs because the Fold was broken. And how it got out of the factory broken, how no one saw this coming at Samsung is still a mind boggle. But the Fold is coming out again. It's going to be released again, according to Samsung, in September. And Samsung claims they fixed it. But we'll get into that later in the show. In this first segment, I wanted to talk to you about just how I was geeking out this week. My most recent geek out. Last Friday, it's really fun to leave work on a Friday. You got the whole weekend ahead of you. And maybe you got a new video game, or you got a new model to put together, or a new Lego set, or some art, easels and paintbrushes, or whatever. Bought a new instrument, and now you have, it's Friday night, you got the whole weekend ahead of you to tinker with it, to enjoy your geek thing. That's how I felt last Friday, when lo and behold, as I am someone who does this, I go to Micro Center's website and I just refresh it to see, in this case, if they have any new Raspberry Pi 4s. As you know, the Raspberry Pi 4 was released recently, and they sell out just as quickly. Raspberry Pis, and whenever they release a new version of it, the 4, the 3, the 2, the first Raspberry Pi, they go very, very quickly. And I didn't use any sort of radio clout, if I have any at all, to call Micro Center and say, will you hold one for me? No, I just went on the website Friday afternoon, saw that they just got a shipment of Raspberry Pi 4s because I wanted a very specific Raspberry Pi 4. Raspberry Pi 4 comes in 3 different variants: the 1GB model, 2GB model, and 4GB model. $35, $45, and $55 respectively. I said, you know what, if I'm going to get a Raspberry Pi 4, I'm going to hold out for the 4GB model. That's by far the rarest model, the hardest one to get. And I just got lucky, went on Micro Center, hit the refresh. Whoop, they have 10 plus in stock of Raspberry Pi 4 4GB model. So I immediately reserved it online so that it would be ready for me to pick up when I left work last Friday. And I did pick it up, and I have been geeking out with my Raspberry Pi 4. So that makes my Raspberry Pi collection at this point. I've got the Pi Zero, which overall, I still think the Pi Zero, even though it's a single core processor, and 1 gig of RAM, 512 megabytes of RAM, something like that. Not very much RAM at all, and it's still the old DDR2 protocol, manufacturing process, what have you. I still think the Raspberry Pi Zero is the coolest Pi because it costs $5. My version of it is the Raspberry Pi Zero W, which has wireless networking built in. So it has Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and it costs $5. Now, by far, it is the least powerful out of the Pis, especially the Pis that I have. The Pi 4 obviously is the most powerful. Then there's the Pi 3B Plus that I have with 1 gigabyte of RAM. And then there's the Pi Zero, which is a single core processor. The other ones are quad core. But I still think it's the coolest because it's the cheapest. You have an operating system that you can use. If you download Raspbian, you have an actual desktop operating system that's usable. And manage your expectations with the Pi Zero. Do not put yourself through the torture of trying to watch anything on YouTube. Do not try to put yourself through the torture of trying to get Netflix to work or Kodi or anything like that. I mean, you can. That the whole point of these single board computers is to tinker with such things. But it's not meant for that. It's meant for very basic productivity. So typing a paper, sure. Using a spreadsheet, sure. It's still mind-boggling to me that Minecraft runs almost perfectly on there, almost 60 frames a second. Very often, most of the time, it is 60 frames a second. How they got Minecraft to run at 60 frames a second on a Raspberry Pi Zero will eternally boggle my brains. And it just shows you how, the elegance and efficiency of efficient coding to make a game like that, which is not an intensive game by any means. It's not a struggle to run on any hardware, but the Pi Zero is so unbelievably not powerful in this modern age, and to have any game on it at all running smoothly is staggering. I tried to run DOSBox on it. DOSBox works just fine. DOSBox is an MS-DOS emulator, and it's available on multiple platforms. It's available, of course, on PC, because as you know, modern day, we don't have MS-DOS. Windows is its own operating system. It used to be that Windows ran on top of DOS back in the day, up until, I want to say, Windows XP. I believe Windows 98 was the last operating system that technically ran on top of DOS. Don't quote me on that. But with the Pentium 4, that was kind of the new age of computing, and we had UEFIs and new BIOS and things like that. But the Pentium 3 that ran Windows 98 was true legacy, x86 architecture, what have you. What was I talking about? DOSBox. So it emulates Microsoft DOS, and you can run DOSBox, obviously, in the Pi Zero, and it's really cool, but I would say that it makes Windows 3.1 run sluggishly when you're using it in DOSBox in the Pi Zero. But that's the way. That's pretty authentic for Windows 3.1. I can already hear you driving around laughing. Windows 3.1 was sluggish. It's crazy when we run Windows 3.1 in DOSBox on a modern, quad-core PC, state-of-the-art PC, and it's so snappy. Click, 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 click. Everything. Oh, it's so smooth. And then you go back to run it on slow hardware. Like, yeah, this is about what I remember. This is this is about what I remember on my old 286 running Windows 3.1. So anyways, the Pi Zero is good for word processing and things like that. Very unintensive tasks. It's great for that. It costs $5. It's incredible. So I was tinkering with the Pi 4 all weekend, running all sorts of things on it, testing it out. And I think it was Monday night or Tuesday night. I haven't done this in a while, and I missed it, and it felt good. I was up until 3 in the morning, fiddling and tinkering with my Raspberry Pi 4. It was amazing, and I found out some very useful information for any of you tinkerers out there who have a Raspberry Pi 4. Stay tuned to the next segment, because I'm going to tell you how to get the best performance, some of the best performance out of your Pi 4. So don't go anywhere. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. As promised, I'm going to tell you as quickly as possible. When you know that's not true, I might ramble around a little bit like I'm doing right now. How to get the best graphics performance out of your Raspberry Pi 4. A quick asterisk before I tell you. I need to tell you what I'm working with personally. The facts and figures and specifications that I'm working with, because it may be different for you. I have the Raspberry Pi 4 4GB model. That's the rarest model. It's the hardest to get. I was lucky enough to find one at Micro Center and blah, blah, blah. It's the 4GB model. So this information especially applies to the 4GB model. It may apply to the 2GB model, but I haven't tested that because I don't own one. And it may apply to the 1GB model, although I would say that with a 1GB model, you'd be running into problems with how much video RAM you need to assign, because the 1GB model obviously only has 1GB. So the magic number I've found for the Raspberry Pi 4 4GB model, the maximum amount of VRAM you can allot is 512 megabytes to run smoothly and perfectly. Now, I am re-recording this segment because I recorded this entire 10-minute or so segment yesterday with my findings, because I did some experiments with my Raspberry Pi 4. Basically, I kept increasing the VRAM until the system crashed. You have to, when you increase the VRAM in the Raspberry Pi 4, under the Raspberry Pi 4 configuration settings. If it doesn't, every time you have to do it, you have to reboot. The computer tells you must reboot before the settings can be applied. That's pretty standard fare. So what I did was I went up to 512 gigabytes, and I kept increasing and increasing and increasing until the Pi wouldn't boot. And my findings were that 512 megabytes of VRAM, as of right now, is the sweet spot. 656 gigabytes of RAM, I meant megabytes, will boot, but the system is extremely unstable. Now, this might come down to the power supply. I have not confirmed this yet, but I am using a Raspberry Pi official power supply. However, it is the Raspberry Pi 3 official power supply with the USB-C converter. As you know, the Raspberry Pi 4 uses USB-C now for charging, and it requires a decent amount of amperage. 3 amps, 3.5 amps or so to run the new Raspberry Pi 4. So I believe the official Raspberry Pi 3 adapter is 2.5 amps over micro USB. So I'm telling you that to say this. It could be that since I'm using a power supply that isn't up to the 3 amps, it is. I don't see why this would be. Maybe a programmer or an engineer out there could tell you. I know theoretically why it couldn't work, but allotting more VRAM to video memory, it's shared VRAM, which means there's the 4 gigabytes of RAM on my Pi 4, and I'm just allocating how much of that system RAM I want to devote to video RAM. So the 4 gigs of RAM is already getting power. You're already using the 4 gigs of RAM, so I don't understand why allocating more or less of it to the VRAM usage would have an effect on power draw. It's DDR4, low power DDR4 RAM. There are different frequencies that they operate at. Maybe that could offer in some power fluctuations or whatever. That's my running guess right now. So anyways, I found that 656 megabytes could boot, but the system was extremely unstable and would crash. So when I recorded this segment yesterday, I said, you know what? I found that 640 megabytes of VRAM is the maximum to run your system stably. But I was wrong. I went home last night after recording that segment, booted up the Pi 4, and it was running normally. But the instability manifested itself not in anything graphical. I didn't run a heavy game or 3D application to bog down the Pi and make it crash. I was trying to download stuff off of my own Dropbox, which Raspbian does not have its own Dropbox client, by the way. So you have to go through the website, through Chromium. And I was trying to download about 3 gigs of files off of my Dropbox, and that it wasn't crashing the Pi. And again, this was running at 640 megabytes of VRAM. It wasn't crashing the Pi, but it was logging me out. It would log me out and then put me back into login screen, which, by the way, the default login password for Pi, if you don't set it up beforehand, the username by default is Pi, and the login password is by default Raspberry, RASPBERRY, just the name of the company. So at 640, I thought it was stable, but trying to download big files, the screen would flick and would log me out and have to log back in. That means it was unstable. So I turned it down to 512 megabytes of VRAM, and I've been running smoothly ever since. I will do more tests to confirm if I can run more. I will try to download the same 3 gig files and see if it kicks me out if I run at, let's say, 600 it's multiples of 16. So if I run anywhere in the low 600s, see if that's still stable. I'll do the same circumstances that crashed last time at 640. I will see if the same thing applies around 600. I'll see how much higher over 512 I can get. That being said, allocating 512 megabytes of VRAM on a Raspberry Pi is more than enough. Trust me, believe me, that is an A load of VRAM for a Raspberry Pi. But we're tinkerers, and I'm a geek, and I'm a spec junkie. So I would like to say, yeah, my Pi is running a slight overclock, 1.6 gigahertz, and it's running at 612 whatever megs of VRAM, or I don't know what the multiple is, just the highest. Does it make anything any better? It does. If it's stable, yes, actually, that's a kind of a dumb question. Does it make the Raspberry Pi run any better if you overclock the CPU and find a magical sweet spot with the VRAM, and if you're able to overclock the VRAM at all? Yes, it makes the Pi 4 better. I will say that you need a heatsink. You need a heatsink on the Raspberry Pi 4, especially if you're going to be overclocking. You can't overclock without a heatsink, basically. And it's a good thing that the Raspberry Pi 4 needs a heatsink, because that means it's powerful enough. The price is still the same. It starts at $35. So anyways, those are my Raspberry Pi 4 findings. I tinkered the other night until 3 a.m. with it. It was a good tinker sesh. Haven't had a late night tinker sesh in a while, and it was fun. Let's talk about something else for the last couple minutes of the segment. So in other news, Nintendo has officially addressed their Joy-Con drift issue. A lot of users were having an issue where your character would move on screen without direct input from the left thumbstick, or it would not receive any input from the left thumbstick whatsoever. And it took Nintendo a long time to even address this issue, but they have officially. They say they will be issuing refunds or fixing it for free. And it's really cool when companies actually apologize for an issue and fix it. They don't just try to sweep it under the rug. That's why it was such a big deal when Apple officially acknowledged the freaking butterfly keyboard issues. Nobody was chastising Apple for having there were people chastising Apple for having a crappy design in the keyboard. But it takes cojones for a big company to say, you know what, we screwed up and we're gonna fix it. So back to Nintendo. I think a lot of geeks, me included, have kind of a love-hate relationship with Apple. It's like a toxic relationship we just can't quit. But I don't want to call Nintendo toxic. It's just they are on both ends of the spectrum in terms of the quality they provide, the fun they provide, the joy that they provide, the nostalgia they provided. We have a love in our heart for Nintendo in that regard. Maybe it's different for content creators, such as myself. The flip side is that Nintendo, while being extremely honorable, is anal when it comes to copyright protection and protecting their intellectual property. You can't mention the word Nintendo or a Nintendo game on YouTube or otherwise without getting the attention of Nintendo. And they won't, I'm not going to say they're overly litigious. They don't sue you very often. But they will do copyright claims against you and strikes against you, and it's just kind of like, are you seriously the iron grip over? It's all free promotion. Anyways, we'll be right back with more Geek Therapy Radio. What else are we going to talk about tonight? Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got, oh my gosh. Well, this is what happens when I try to record a show on the job. You know what? I'm phone screening for Michael Berry Show right now. I'm going to let you hear behind the scenes how I screen calls for the Michael Berry Show. Sorry, I had to move the mic. Here we go. This is what I'm paid to do. So, let's just do it. Michael Berry Show, name please? Daniel, where are you calling from? Houston. What do you want to tell Michael about? Oh, that's very true. Let me put you on hold to talk to Michael, okay? Just make sure your radio's off if it's on or anything. All right, brother, hold on. And that's how I screen calls for the Michael Berry Show. Back on track here. I'm sorry that the show, well, I'm sorry but not sorry. I didn't know that the show was going to turn into such a Pi 4-centric show. I have one last thing to say about the Raspberry Pi 4. If you have one or don't have one yet, you want one. All Pi 4s, regardless of how much memory it has, 1, 2, or 4 gigabytes of RAM. All Pi 4s run hot. So this is the first Pi where I would say that it is very advisable to get some sort of case, and cases for Pi 4s are cheap. Heat sinks, you can get a heat sink for the CPU for 50 cents, 25 cents, a dollar for an expensive one, maybe $2 for the most expensive. This is the first Pi where I say, you know what, it's really a good idea to put a heat sink on the CPU, just it's the size of a dime, a little heat sink on the CPU, and even better if you put a little fan on there. So if you buy a case that has a built-in little fan, that's going to help your temps a lot, because the Pi 4, if you're running intensive tasks, will throttle. It'll get hot. And a lot of people take this, and I promise I'll get off Pi 4 in a moment, for those of you who are tired of listening to me talk about the Raspberry Pi 4. The Pi 4 it's a good thing that it runs hot. You know, that's a kind of a controversial statement for me to say, but it's still a cheap device. It still comes in at starting at $35. And the fact that it gets hot means that it's quite powerful now. It is 2 to 4 times more powerful than the outgoing Pi 3. So it's a good thing that is powerful enough at the same price point to get hot. So do you need a heatsink for the Pi 4 to do random tasks, you know, multitasking, watching YouTube, doing whatever you're going to do with the Raspberry Pi, office work, anything like that? No, you don't really need that. You'll be just fine. But as soon as you start throwing stuff at it, if you start trying to play a game with it, for instance, it's going to throttle. And it can actually throttle quite intensely depending on what you're doing. So it's a good idea at least to put on a little 50-cent dime-sized heatsink. Even better if you throw a teeny tiny little fan on there, and you're good to go. It's a good thing that the Pi 4 tends to run a little hotter, because that means it's powerful. All right, let's move on. It's no mistake. I'm talking about the Corvette now. I've shifted gears, get it, to the new C8 Corvette. If you'll remember, if you subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio on YouTube, especially, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and you should, I did a whole video about, and I think I released the audio of it in as a podcast version, but I did a whole video on the evolution of the Corvette as far as being mid-engine goes. That the Corvette was always meant to be mid-engined since the late 50s. Just a few years after the Corvette itself came out, it was meant to be mid-engined. They were already designing the mid-engine follow-up. So one of the biggest controversies with the C8 Corvette is that it is a dramatic departure from the Corvettes that we've come to know in the public. That regardless of behind the scenes at General Motors and Chevrolet, regardless of them working on mid-engine Corvettes, several models of them, tons. Seriously, go watch the video on Geek Therapy Radio on YouTube and watch the evolution of mid-engine Corvette prototypes and how close we've come actually in the past to having a mid-engine Corvette offered to the public. We've come very close. What it always boils down to, like in any business, is the bean counters saying, the C3 is doing so well that we don't want to mess with those sales by introducing a superior handling mid-engine Corvette. That even despite the mid-engine Corvette being a better car than the traditional front rear drive Corvette, it was a numbers game, and it was about money. Now, and I have to give props to Chevy that they actually pulled the trigger on the mid-engine Corvette. That even though they've been dabbling with the mid-engine Corvette since, for almost around 70 years or so, that in 2020 we actually get a mid-engine Corvette. It's long overdue. And yes, I understand that it's controversial. And let me to kind of tell you where I'm coming from. So to tell you where my opinions are coming from, just so you know where I'm at in my mental space when it comes to the Corvette. I personally have never liked Corvettes. I personally could care less about Corvettes. I was not a geek about Corvettes. I didn't hate Corvettes. They're just dime a dozen. Everyone had a Corvette. Everyone wanted a Corvette. It was just slightly more special than a Ford Mustang. You see Ford Mustangs everywhere. As far as sports cars go, you see Corvettes almost everywhere as well. Nowhere near like Mustangs, but you get what I'm saying? Everybody wanted a Corvette. People would prepare their garages as soon as they got their first house. They would prepare it for a Corvette. Then one magical day, they actually get to carry the Corvette home. Yeah, they carried the Corvette in their arms like a little baby to the crib that they've prepared for it. No, they drive the Corvette home. They're finally able to afford the Corvette, or maybe not afford. That's probably a bad term. Maybe they just technically had enough money at the moment to put a down payment on the Corvette at the dealership. Regardless, they brought the Corvette home. Their automotive life all amounts to this moment. They have their golden child Corvette. That was never me. But I can certainly relate to that. Let's just call it what it is, an emotion and a desire for a material object with my love for a DeLorean. Now, here's the difference, though. To get off base a little bit, we'll come back to the mid-engine Corvette in a second. I got my DeLorean, it'll be 19 years this July, actually. I've had it for 19 years. When you have a car that long, it's not a material object anymore. There are memories tied up into it. There's memories infused into the metal and plastic of it all. So when I first got the DeLorean, and I thought it was just a really cool car, and I wanted a car that stood out, and it was cheap enough at the time. It has skyrocketed in value since then. It's a very good investment. But the memories I've made, carpooling with it, fitting 3 to 4 people inside of a 2-seater car, delivering pizza with it, driving it around town, fixing it, working on it myself, changing oil, and all the life changes that have happened since while I've owned that car. There's memories and nostalgia and sentiment, a lot of sentimental value in there. It's become more than metal. Yes, it is just a machine, but there's so much sentiment tied up into it. It's more than that. And I know a lot of you who aren't even car people, you still have sentiment for some old cars that you grew up with. So my love for my DeLorean is no longer object. I don't love objects, but I love the car now because of all the memories in it. It's not about money, it's about the memories. If I sold it, I would be sad because of all the memories that are tied into it. So anyways, all I'm saying is that I understand people's devotion to a Corvette and their desire to have a Corvette and working hard for a Corvette. I just personally never liked Corvette, but I can relate to somebody liking Corvette because I like a different car, the DeLorean. So, I could care less about Corvettes, but here's what the new C8 Corvette does. It makes me, who previously could care less about Corvettes, really want a Corvette. Will I ever buy one? I don't know. I have no idea. Most likely not. Do I want to drive one? Yes, very much so. I think Corvettes are cool now. I like Corvettes. I'm interested in the Corvette story right now at 2020. Yes, the Corvette story was fascinating before 2020, but it's grabbed me now. As someone who didn't care about Corvettes, it's grabbed me. So as controversial as the design change is from the norm with Corvette diehards, some diehards are cool with this. Some diehards know the mid-engine Corvette story, and they say, well, this is where it was going all along. Back with the last generation of Corvette that changed the rear tail light design from the 4 ovals, that Chevy had hell to pay for that simple design change of the rear tail light. So yeah, those people are going to be pissed that the engine is in a different place now. I should mention that sadly and disappointingly so and tragically, the new C8 Corvette will not be offered with a manual transmission. It is only a sequential gearbox, flappy paddles, shifting with the steering wheel and no clutch. There is only 2 pedals in the new C8 Corvette. Chevy will not be bringing a manual transmission to the C8 Corvette. That is a crying shame. It does start under $60,000 though. The closest mid-engine vehicle with that kind of performance is going to cost $250,000 and be Italian. More Geek Therapy Radio coming up. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. Before we go any further, it's been a while since... Well, not been a while since I've plugged the podcast or the YouTube channel or social media, but I want to re-encourage those of you listening. Maybe you're relatively new to the show. Maybe you found me through other channels of media. You know, maybe you found me on YouTube by talking to Clint from LGR, or the Angry Video Game Nerd, or the 8-Bit Guy, or Austin Evans, or who have you. But I want to re-encourage you, if you're just listening, you're driving around and you found this show on KPRC 950 AM. Hey, welcome in. This show is for you. It's Geek Therapy Radio. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. But I want to encourage you to continue to reach out to me. A few of you have, and I've been active with a few of you who've reached out to me in earnest, and you kind of dig the message that I'm promoting here, that we're all geeks about something. So I want to continue to do that over the airwaves in this broadcast. Please reach out to me. geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. That's the email. I don't say that enough on the show. But to email me directly, it's geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. So geektherapy.com. geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. So yeah, geektherapyradio.com also. You can also message me through there. The website, geektherapyradio.com. Send me a message through there. There's a contact page. All the podcasts, by the way, are available right on that front page there, as well as the link right to the YouTube channel. It's kind of polished looking. I designed the website myself. I'm not a web designer, but I kind of do what I can. It's just a good portal to get you connected with the show and get you connected with me. So when you do reach out to me, and possibly the easiest way is right there on the website, geektherapyradio.com, and also on Facebook, Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook. Just Google Geek Therapy Radio, and all the avenues come up. Instagram isn't the greatest thing for messaging back and forth. Twitter's really good, Geek Therapy Radio on Twitter. I think it's @GeekTherapyKPRC. The point is to contact me. Let me know what you're into. So maybe you've heard the show in the past and you might be thinking, oh, I really wish you would touch on this subject or that subject. Let me know. Tell me. Because I will do it, and I have done it in the past. So if you come out of the woodwork and say, man, I'm really into RC airplanes or restoring, I don't know, pianos or whatever. I had a guy come out of the woodwork and say he builds Bluetooth speakers. So he builds Bluetooth speakers from scratch with different themes. So like the Texans and the Astros and the Rockets and things like that. It's really cool. That was his geek thing. That's what he does. That was his hobby. And I love hearing things like that. So if you have a hobby that you're into, you build Lego or erector sets, or I don't know what you're into, but let me know. Because the reason why, here's the reason why I'm putting this out there. Because let's say you're somebody who likes to tinker with, I don't know, programming. Or maybe you like to tinker with Raspberry Pis like we've talked about. Maybe you like to work on cars. By you sharing your story with me, and then me sharing it on the air, you help inspire other people to get into that hobby. You share your hobby and you share that joy with other people that might not have otherwise thought about it. Or you're the catalyst to remind them, oh yeah, back in the day I used to like working on cars, and then life gets in the way and I really should get back into that. You know, it might be something like that. Or making music. If you have music, actually, if you're out there, if you have music, if you're a bedroom musician and you've recorded stuff into your computer, you're a songwriter, anything like that, send me your music. I'll showcase it on the air if it's clean. I had one guy send me a rapper, and I was super excited because whenever rappers come out of the woodwork, it's always like a crapshoot. You know, the dude selling his CDs out of the back of his Impala at Walmart, 99 times out of 100, it's terrible. It's god-awful. But every once in a while, you get someone coming out of the woodwork that, wow, you really have some talent. And you're talented because you're not trying to sound like Dr. Dre or Snoop or Eminem or whatever. You sound like you. You've got your own personality, and you're really good. So every once in a while, you get something like that. And I would love to showcase something like that on my show. So if you're a musician, it doesn't have to be rap, of course. Maybe you're into EDM, or maybe you're acoustic guitar, singer-songwriter. share your music with me. I'll put it on the air if it's clean, and if let's be real here, if it boils down to whether I want to or not, or whether or not it's a good fit. But I would love to showcase music. There's a very good chance that I will play it on the air and give you the cred. A lot of us are geeks about music and making music, myself included. I've included some of my songs very extremely rarely. I haven't done it in a long time, but I've shared some of my stuff on the show. Maybe I'll do it again in the future. Maybe you're an artist. Share me your art, and I'll promote it on the radio. I'll tell where people to go look at it. It's probably going to be the Geek Therapy Radio Facebook page or Twitter or Instagram or something like that. Share your hobbies with me. Share your geek things with me, and therefore share it with the city. Someone might be listening to the radio show, like I said, and remember that they have their old easel in the garage in watercolors, and it might be inspired to get back into it. And so just by the mere act of you sharing your geek thing with me, you're sharing joy. It might come at a time in this person's life who's just casually tuning in and hears this. It might come at a time in their life where they're feeling horrible and they're feeling down and depressed, and this literally could save their life. Rekindling their old geek thing, an old hobby, or inspiring a new one, it couldn't come at a better time for a lot of people. But it all starts with you sharing it with me. Don't just share it with me, share it with others too, outside of the radio and just in normal life. Don't be afraid to share your geek thing with others. But I would love to hear about it. geektherapy@iheartmedia.com, that's the email, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com. geektherapyradio.com, there's contact information there. And Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, Instagram, and the YouTube channel. Lots of cool stuff on Geek Therapy Radio YouTube. So a few things to mention on the way out here. I haven't talked about video cards in a while because, frankly, it's to me personally, it's not very interesting. It's kind of stale as far as graphics cards are concerned. NVIDIA just released the RTX 2080 Super Edition, which is basically a little bit more beefed. It's a little bit more than a standard RTX 2080, but a little less than a 2080 Ti. Okay, cool. And basically AMD forced NVIDIA's hand here. They tricked them into releasing it. So there you have it, RTX 2080 and 2070, I believe, Super. There's just not much news there with graphics cards. Oh, Samsung, the Galaxy Fold that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Yeah, Samsung Galaxy Fold. Samsung's going to release it this time in earnest. They say it goes on sale in September after their failed first. It wasn't a launch because they gave it to a bunch of tech reviewers to review, and almost all of them found that it was broken, that it broke easily, and the screen broke. And turns out it's hard to fold a phone screen in half. But Samsung swears that they fixed it. They've beefed up the mechanism. They've made changes to the hinge, and they've made changes to the screen protector. So this time, people shouldn't screw it up so much. Still costs $1,900. Still costs almost $2,000. And as it comes out of my mouth every time, it sounds bonkers. A $2,000 smartphone, but it's bleeding edge. I would like to get my hands on one. I would not like to buy one. I am so super duper happy with my Galaxy Note 9. Actually, I take that back. They took away Pro Video mode. If I would have known that, I wouldn't have bought a Samsung Galaxy Note 9. Had I known they were going to take away Pro Video mode that lets you set things like ISO and exposure and shutter speed and all that kind of stuff. Took it away. They just figure, our automatic mode is good enough. You shouldn't need to use. Screw you! I wouldn't have bought the phone if I knew you were going to take away Pro Video mode. I depended on that. Anyways, well, otherwise it's a great phone. Galaxy Fold. We'll see. They'll have real egg on their face if it fails again. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Be good to yourselves and others, and I'll see you next week.